Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time, not to the gilded halls of kings and queens, but to the muddy, chaotic streets of a 14th century port town. Picture it, the smell of the sea, salt and fish mixed with the less pleasant odours of open sewers and crowded humanity. You're standing on a bustling dock, your boots sinking slightly into the muck, the air thick with the cries of merchants and the creak of ship timbers. A galleon has just arrived from the east, its massive sail furled, its hold full of silks, spices, and something far more insidious. A chill runs down your spine that has nothing to do with the sea breeze. This isn't just a story, this is a survival guide for a nightmare you can't wake up from. You'll soon discover that your modern knowledge is about as useful as a chocolate teapot when faced with the realities of the Black Death. You probably won't survive this, but we're going to try. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. If you're listening live, maybe drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to see where we're all listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a citizen of this bustling port town, maybe a merchant, a baker, or a simple labourer. Life is hard, but it's a life you know. The first whispers of the plague are just that, whispers. They come from sailors, talking of a strange illness sweeping through the Far East and Byzantium. It seems like a world away, something for exotic places and foreign people. You dismiss it. Of course, people are always getting sick. But then, the first ship arrives with a ghost crew. No one disembarks, the sailors are found dead in their hammocks, their bodies marked with horrifying black boils. This is your first clue, your first chance. The city officials, in their infinite wisdom, decide to unload the cargo anyway. Money, after all, must be made. You watch as men carry bales and crates ashore, their faces pale, a nervous energy crackling in the air. This, my friend, is where you must make a choice. Do you stay in the town you know, or do you flee? The historical record tells us that the Black Death, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, first entered Europe through major trading ports like Messina in Sicily in 1347. From there, it spread along the well-trodden trade routes, both by land and sea, with a terrifying swiftness that the medieval world had never encountered. The common folk, like you, had no concept of germ theory. You're thinking about foul humours, bad smells, and divine punishment. The idea that a flea on a rat could be the bringer of doom is a concept so foreign it would sound like a lunatic's rambling. The scientific consensus today is pretty solid on the cause, but historians still argue whether the initial outbreak was pneumonic, bubonic, or a combination of both, a key distinction that would determine how the disease was transmitted and how quickly it spread. A quirky tidbit: the plague didn't just affect people. One of the first signs of trouble in a community was often the sudden and massive die-off of local cats and dogs. Imagine that, your faithful companion, gone overnight, and you still have no idea why. It's a cruel, silent warning that you, in this moment, are completely missing. The town council meets, and their response is a classic example of too little, too late. They debate for days, weeks even, while the first cases pop up. A baker, then a blacksmith, then a laundress. It's always someone you know, someone you saw just yesterday. You feel a growing knot of dread in your stomach. The air itself feels heavy with it, but still, the daily rhythms of life continue, a bizarre refusal to acknowledge the storm gathering on the horizon. The truth is, people are creatures of habit. It's hard to just abandon your life, your home, your shop, your family, on the basis of a few rumours and some dead sailors. You're paralysed by a blend of denial and hope, a very human cocktail that, in this case, might just be lethal. Your window of opportunity is closing. The wise move, the one that goes against every fibre of your being, would be to pack what you can and leave. But you don't, not yet. You watch, and you wait, like everyone else, hoping the terrible stories will just stop. They won't. As the plague begins its slow, creeping march through the town, you start to notice the sanitation, or rather, the stark lack of it. It's not something you'd normally think about. Right? It's just the way things are. But now, with a new and terrifying disease on everyone's mind, you can't help but see it everywhere. You trudge down a street that is little more than a muddy trench, with household waste and refuse thrown out of windows. The stench is overpowering. A constant assault on your senses. You hold a small cloth to your nose. A futile gesture against the miasma theory that you and everyone else believes in, the idea that bad smells, or miasma, are what cause disease. You're trying to breathe the cleaner air, but you're surrounded by filth. There are no public sanitation systems as we know them. Human and animal waste collects in cesspits or runs in open channels. It's a breeding ground for the very thing that is now killing your neighbours. Your daily routine, once so familiar, becomes an exercise in risk assessment. You avoid certain alleys. You cross to the other side of the street if you see someone with a suspicious cough. You try to wash your hands more, but the water comes from a public well that might itself be contaminated. This lack of hygiene wasn't just a simple oversight, it was the norm for the time. A mainstream historical fact is that many medieval cities had no formal waste disposal systems at all, relying instead on pigs to eat refuse in the streets and the hope that rain would eventually wash things away. A truly charming system, isn't it? Historians still argue whether medieval people were truly oblivious to the connection between filth and disease, or if they simply lacked the technology and civic organization to do anything about it. Was it ignorance or impotence? You're starting to suspect it's a grim combination of both. You hear rumors of a man in the next town over who is collecting a fortune by selling purified air in small jars. You scoff at this. Even as a small, irrational part of you wonders if there's any truth to it. The streets, once bustling with life, are now unnervingly quiet. You see families trying to quarantine themselves in their homes, boarding up windows and doors. You remember the old man who ran the local tannery. He was so proud of his work, which involved vats of urine and other unspeakable things. He used to joke that the stench kept him safe from all ailments. He was one of the first to die. You can't help but think there's a cosmic joke in that somewhere. A quirky tidbit that now seems terrifyingly relevant. Many medieval communities had a night soil collector, a person whose job was to empty the cesspits. This was a low-status but essential job, and these individuals often had a higher chance of survival during plagues, not because they were cleaner, but because they lived on the outskirts of town, away from the most crowded and infected areas. They were practicing social distancing without even knowing it. You see a passing cart, loaded high with human waste, and you wonder if the man driving it is the luckiest person in town. It seems so counterintuitive, doesn't it? The dirtiest job is suddenly the safest. You can't shake the feeling that your very environment is conspiring against you. The rats, oh, the rats. They are everywhere. They scurry through the streets, brazenly, as if they own the place. You see them on the docks, on the carts, even in the kitchens of the local inn. You swat one away from a bag of grain. A simple, habitual act that now feels loaded with a terrifying new meaning. You don't know it, but these creatures are the real enemy. Or rather, the fleas they carry are. The world you live in is a perfectly designed vector for a disease you don't understand, and your best survival strategies are based on a scientific theory that is completely and utterly wrong. You trudge home, trying to step around the worst of the muck. A sense of foreboding settling over you like a thick fog. This is the new normal, and it's only going to get worse. The town, in a sudden panic, finally decides to act. You're standing in the square as a town crier, his voice cracking with a mix of authority and fear, reads a proclamation. All ships arriving from affected ports must now anchor offshore for a period of 40 days. This is the origin of the term quarantine, from the Italian 40 giorni. For 40 days, the city hopes. Any disease will either kill those on board or burn itself out, saving the rest of you. It seems like a sensible plan, but you watch as a small fleet of merchant vessels, eager to sell their goods, simply sail to a neighbouring, less vigilant port just a few miles down the coast. The disease, you realise with a sinking feeling, doesn't respect imaginary lines on a map or the poorly enforced decrees of local officials. The initial efforts are laughably ineffective. A few watchmen are posted at the city gates, but people are still coming and going, carrying their goods, their worries, and their invisible cargo of fleas. The local lord, in a grand gesture, decrees that anyone showing the telltale black boils should be isolated in a makeshift lazaretto on the outskirts of town. A mainstream historical fact is that these isolation hospitals were some of the first public health measures attempted. even if they were often little more than flimsy sheds where the sick were left to die. But what happens to the families of the infected? They are often left to fend for themselves, the healthy now forced to share close quarters with the sick, and the disease just keeps on spreading. You hear about a group of travelers who were caught trying to sneak into the city. They were given a choice: turn back or face the gallows. They turned back. But you know that for every person caught, a dozen more probably found another way in. The sheer scale of the population and the lack of a proper enforcement mechanism make these measures feel more like a performance than a solution. It's a bit like trying to stop a flood with a single teacup. Historians still argue whether these early quarantine efforts, however flawed, actually slowed the spread of the plague at all, or if they just delayed the inevitable for a short period. Was it a valiant but doomed effort, or a complete waste of time and resources? Your own small world is contracting. Your friend, the cooper, has boarded up his shop and is refusing to see anyone. You respect his caution but also worry about his sanity. A quirky tidbit you learn from a passing sailor is that in some cities, doctors began carrying small, hollowed-out bird skulls filled with sweet-smelling herbs, believing this would ward off the plague. Imagine a world where your best defense is sniffing a bird skull. You see a man trying to do just that in the market, holding a small, polished skull to his nose with a desperate, frantic look in his eyes. You can't help but feel a flicker of pity and, if you're honest, a little bit of dark humor. It's so absurd, it's almost funny. And humor, even gallows humor, is a small relief in this suffocating atmosphere of dread. The local priest gives a fiery sermon, declaring the plague to be God's punishment for your collective sins. He preaches that the only way to survive is through prayer and repentance, a message that resonates with the terrified masses. You see people on their knees, begging for forgiveness, while a sick man is carried past on a stretcher, his face a mask of pain and his body a testament to the fact that prayer alone isn't a cure. It's all just a jumble of competing ideas. And you, a simple person, are caught in the middle. Do you trust the town officials, the doctors, the priests, or do you trust your own instincts, which are screaming at you to run? These quarantine efforts were a first, fumbling step, a sign that people were trying to fight back, but they were no match for the true enemy, ignorance and a tiny, ruthless bacterium. The whispers of the plague turn into a deafening roar, the death toll mounts, and the town becomes a place of mourning and fear. You finally make the decision you've been dreading. You have to leave. You pack a small satchel with what you can carry, some hard bread, a chunk of cheese, a few coins, and your most cherished trinkets. The silence of your small cottage, once a comfort, is now a heavy blanket of dread. You slip out of the city gates, not through the main entrance, which is now heavily guarded, but through a small, crumbling side wall you know from your youth. You are now a refugee, a small speck of a person against the vast and terrifying landscape of a plague-ridden world. Your journey into the countryside is fraught with its own dangers. You trudge along a muddy road, your feet aching, your mind replaying the faces of those you've lost. You pass by small villages that have, in a way, quarantined themselves from the outside world. Doors are barred, windows are shuttered, and a deep, unnerving quiet hangs in the air. The people inside watch you from behind small slits, their faces pale and suspicious. You are no longer one of them. You are an outsider, a potential carrier of the very doom they are trying to escape. This is a crucial survival strategy: physical isolation. By removing yourself from the dense population of the city, you are drastically reducing your chances of exposure. It's a lonely path, but it's a rational one. A mainstream historical fact is that the plague often hit urban areas far harder than rural ones. The close quarters, poor sanitation, and constant influx of people and goods made cities perfect breeding grounds for the disease. You might think that this is a simple, logical point, but for the average person in the 14th century, the city was the center of their world. To leave it was to abandon your livelihood, your community, and all that was familiar. It was a leap of faith into an unknown wilderness, a choice that few were brave enough to make. Historians still argue about the exact population figures, but it's widely believed that some rural areas were almost entirely spared, while neighboring cities were completely decimated. It's a grim lottery. And you've just bought a ticket with better odds. You find a quiet spot to rest for the night, a small clearing near a babbling brook. You pull out your meager provisions and eat slowly, listening to the night sounds. A quirky tidbit that you don't realize but that is helping you is the belief in pestilential wind. Many people believe the plague was carried on the wind, and they would avoid high ground or open fields, believing the wind to be strongest there. You, however, find yourself drawn to the open countryside, the fresh air, the feeling of being away from the crowded, disease-choked cities. Your belief is wrong, but your action is right. You're following your gut, and in this case, your gut is leading you to safety. Your journey is a lonely one. You meet a few other travelers, also fleeing, but you keep a wide berth. Everyone is a potential threat. You learn to forage for wild berries and edible plants. A skill you never thought you'd need. You sleep under the stars. Your dreams haunted by the sight of the town you left behind. A part of you feels immense guilt for leaving, for abandoning those who couldn't or wouldn't go. But another part, the survival part, knows you made the only choice you could. You are no hero, you are a survivor. And as you continue your solitary journey, you realize that this is what life is now, a constant search for safety, a quiet refusal to become just another number on the ever-growing death toll. Your lonely journey takes you further from the cities, but the plague's invisible influence is still felt everywhere, manifesting not just in death but in the strange new theories people are creating to explain the inexplicable. You hear a story from a traveling peddler, a man with a wild look in his eyes, who swears the plague is caused by a planetary alignment, a conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars. He shows you a crude drawing he made on a piece of parchment, a tangle of lines and circles that, to him, represents the perfect storm of celestial malice. A mainstream historical fact is that many learned men of the time, including some of the most respected scholars at the University of Paris, genuinely believed this astrological explanation, an idea that seemed to provide a logical, albeit completely wrong, framework for a world gone mad. As you walk, you pass a man standing alone in a field, waving his arms and shouting at the sky. He believes the plague is a direct punishment from God, sent to cleanse the world of sin. He tells you that the only way to survive is to live a life of perfect piety, to flagellate yourself, and to pray without ceasing. He's not an official preacher, just a simple farmer who has lost everything and is now trying to find meaning in the chaos. You nod politely and keep walking, but his words, and his desperation, stick with you. This religious fervour, while providing comfort for some, also led to mass hysteria and the persecution of minority groups. Historians still argue whether the plague simply amplified existing religious beliefs or whether it fundamentally altered the theological landscape of the era. You stop to rest in a small, abandoned hut and find a peculiar object left behind. A small amulet made of what looks like dried toad legs and a single, polished stone. A quirky tidbit is that people wore these plague amulets or carried strange concoctions to ward off the disease. Some believed that the plague was a poison carried on the air, and so they would fill these amulets with sweet-smelling herbs or, in some truly bizarre cases, dried feces from a healthy person, believing that a similar, non-plague odour would repel the miasma. The logic is non-existent, but the fear is very real. You pick it up, turning it over in your hands, and feel a small flicker of that desperate hope. You don't put it on, but you don't throw it away, either. It's a physical manifestation of a world trying to make sense of a senseless catastrophe. You overhear two men arguing by a stream. One believes the plague is spread by bad smells, or miasmas, and is therefore trying to burn piles of aromatic woods to purify the air. The other insists the plague is a form of demonic possession and is trying to cast out the demons from the sick by shouting incantations and ringing a small handbell. Neither of them is close to the truth, but they are both trying to fight back in the only way they know how. It's a tragicomedy of errors, a desperate lashing out against an invisible enemy. The sheer variety of these theories, from the scientific, in their minds, to the supernatural, shows just how little was known about the human body and disease at the time. As you continue your journey, you realize that the real pandemic isn't just the plague, it's the fear and confusion that it has spawned. Everyone is grasping for an explanation, any explanation, that will give them a semblance of control. You've heard theories of poisoned wells, of Jewish conspiracies, of vengeful angels. The truth is far simpler and, in a way, far more terrifying. A tiny, unthinking bacterium, carried by a flea on a rat, has brought a continent to its knees. And all these frantic, strange, and often violent responses are just the noise of humanity trying to cope with a reality it simply cannot comprehend. You clutch your satchel tighter and keep moving, knowing that the only theory that matters is the one that gets you to tomorrow. As you continue your lonely journey through the countryside, the effects of the plague on daily life become starkly clear, especially when it comes to something as basic as food. The roads are emptier, yes, but the few merchants you see are charging exorbitant prices for their goods. Your small stash of coins feels less and less valuable with every passing day. The local markets, once vibrant centres of trade and gossip, are now half empty. You see rotting produce on the stalls and farmers with grim faces, their crops untended. The plague hasn't just infected people, it has poisoned the very flow of commerce. A mainstream historical fact is that the Black Death caused a massive economic upheaval. Labour shortages led to soaring wages for the survivors, but also rampant inflation. As the few remaining goods became incredibly expensive, it was a vicious cycle that you are now living through, one ration of hard bread at a time. You realise that your diet has become incredibly simple. You're no longer thinking about fresh fruit or roasted meats. You're thinking about calories and survival. You eat berries you can identify, wild greens, and the occasional fish you manage to catch in a stream. The trade routes, which once brought exotic spices and fine cloths to your city, are now a memory. A quirky tidbit you recall from a travelling merchant is a story about a ship from the east that was carrying a massive cargo of pepper. The crew all died, and the ship was left to drift. The pepper, a luxury good that once would have made a man's fortune, was now completely worthless, as there was no one to buy it and no one brave enough to risk retrieving it. The thought of that abandoned ship, laden with a fortune no one could touch, is a testament to the new reality. You find yourself in a small hamlet and cautiously approach a baker's shop. The baker, a gaunt man with flour-dusted clothes, eyes you with suspicion. He has a loaf of bread for sale, but he wants a shocking amount of money for it. You haggle, but he holds firm, his face a mask of weary resolve. There's no one left to mill the flour, he explains, and the grain shipment stopped weeks ago. You begrudgingly pay his price, your stomach rumbling, and walk away with a small, warm loaf that feels like a prize. This simple transaction reveals the entire economic breakdown of the world you're in. Historians still argue whether the post-plague economic changes were a net benefit for the common labourer in the long run, as the labour shortage eventually led to the end of serfdom in many places, or if the immediate chaos and famine outweighed any future gains. You pass a field where the crops are overgrown and choked with weeds. The owner is long gone, probably dead. You think about the food on the table back in your city, how you used to complain about the price of a chicken. Now, a single chicken would feel like a king's feast. You see a stray cow, its ribs showing, wandering aimlessly. It's a valuable animal, but there's no one to claim it, no one to milk it, no one to even think of butchering it. The very foundations of the food chain, from the farms to the markets, have been shattered. You sit on a fallen log, taking a bite of your precious bread, and the taste is bittersweet. You're alive, but you're a survivor in a world that is slowly starving itself to death. As you continue your journey, you find that the plague has not only killed people but has also killed the rule of law. The social order is unraveling before your eyes. You come across a burnt-out homestead, its roof a charred skeleton against the sky. A woman, her face streaked with soot and tears, is rummaging through the rubble. She tells you a grim story. A group of bandits, seeing the local lord and his men either dead or fled, rode in and took everything of value, burning the place to the ground on their way out. The absence of authority, once a distant concept, is now a brutal reality. The fear of disease is being replaced, in some places, by the fear of man. You are constantly on guard, your hand instinctively going to the small, rusty knife you carry. You sleep in shifts, if you're travelling with anyone, and you choose your resting spots carefully, far from the main roads. A mainstream historical fact is that the breakdown of feudal society during the plague was a real and terrifying phenomenon. Lords and landowners were often the first to flee, leaving the peasants to fend for themselves. This created a power vacuum that was quickly filled by those with the strength and ruthlessness to take what they wanted. You see firsthand that in a world without law, The only law that matters is survival of the fittest. You witness a bizarre scene near a small bridge. A group of men, armed with clubs and scythes, have set up a makeshift toll booth. They are demanding a tribute from anyone who wants to cross. They're not soldiers or city guards, they are just local farmers who have decided to take matters into their own hands. It's a protection racket, plain and simple, but in this new world, it feels almost normal. You pay the toll, a few precious coins, and keep walking, feeling a mix of anger and a strange kind of understanding. This is what happens when the structures of society collapse. Historians still argue about whether this lawlessness was a temporary symptom of the plague, or if it was a final nail in the coffin for the medieval social order, paving the way for a more individualistic and self-reliant society. You hear stories of entire villages that have fallen to infighting and looting. A quirky tidbit you hear is of a town where the people, in their fear and confusion, turned on a family of travellers, accusing them of poisoning the local well. The travellers were executed, their belongings looted, and the well was left untouched. Of course, the plague continued to spread. The mob, in its blind panic, had created its own monster, a new and terrible form of justice born of desperation. The very word neighbour has lost its meaning. Everyone is a stranger, a potential threat. As you walk, you realize that the world you knew is gone forever. The intricate web of loyalties, obligations, and rules that governed your life has been torn to shreds. In its place is a kind of brutal, primitive chaos. You are your own lord, your own lawman, your own judge and jury. The decisions you make now, the people you trust or don't trust, the path you choose to take, they are all your own. It's a terrifying kind of freedom, one that is bought at the price of everything you once held dear, as if the plague itself weren't enough. The terror and despair gripping the world have birthed a new phenomenon. You're walking on a road that winds its way through a forest when you hear a low chanting in the distance. The sound is hypnotic and unsettling. You stop, hidden behind a large oak tree, and watch as a procession of people, maybe 50 or 60 strong, comes into view. They are the flagellants. A mainstream historical fact is that this movement of penitents, believing the plague was divine punishment, emerged in Europe during the Black Death. They would march from town to town, whipping themselves with leather scourges tipped with iron spikes. You watch, transfixed, as the group passes. Their faces are a mix of intense religious fervour and pure agony. They chant hymns, their voices thin and reedy, while the rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of the scourges against their bare backs is the only percussion. You can see the blood soaking their white cloaks, a grisly stain that seems to grow with every step. Their leader, a wild-eyed man with a long beard, preaches to the few onlookers, a small group of terrified villagers huddled at the edge of the road. He says that by punishing themselves, they are appeasing God and atoning for the sins of all mankind. He promises them salvation and an end to the plague. The scene is both horrifying and strangely compelling. You can almost understand the appeal in a world where nothing makes sense. This offers a clear, if brutal, path to a solution. It's a way to regain some control over a fate that feels completely out of your hands. Historians still argue whether the flagellants were a genuine grassroots religious movement or a cynical exploitation of mass hysteria. Were they sincere in their beliefs, or did they simply provide a channel for a populace that was desperate for an outlet for their fear and grief? You can't tell from your hiding spot, but you can feel the raw power of their conviction. A quirky tidbit that you find both fascinating and unsettling is that the flagellants were often treated with a mixture of reverence and fear. They were sometimes welcomed into towns as saviors, but their presence also led to increased anti-Semitism and violence, as they often blamed minorities for the plague. Their movement was eventually condemned by the Pope, but by then, the damage had already been done, and the group had sown a deeper sense of chaos in an already fractured world. You let the procession pass, their chanting and the sound of the whips fading into the distance. You feel a strange kind of relief when they're gone. It's a kind of madness you don't want to get caught up in. You're trying to survive by running from the disease. But they are trying to survive by embracing the pain. The two approaches are diametrically opposed, and you have a feeling that yours is the more logical one. Still, the sight of their bloody backs and their desperate faces will stay with you long after you've left the forest behind. You are a witness to a world that is not just dying, but also losing its mind. The road you're on leads you to a small, isolated farm. The farmer, a grizzled old man with a face like a weathered boot, eyes you warily but offers you a glass of milk and a place to rest by his fire. He's been lucky, he says, and he credits his survival to his own brand of medicine. This is where you get a glimpse into the truly bizarre world of medieval medical theory. The farmer takes you to a small hut behind his house, a place filled with drying herbs, strange bottles, and an overpowering smell. He tells you that he drinks a concoction of brewed rosemary and rue every morning, and that he hangs bundles of lavender and other sweet-smelling plants in every room to purify the air. You don't know it, but this is a form of aromatherapy, and while it won't kill the plague, it might just keep the fleas away. He also shows you a jar filled with leeches, fat and slimy, which he uses to balance the humours. This is a mainstream historical fact. Medieval medicine was heavily based on the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. Sickness was believed to be an imbalance of these humours, and the cure was to restore the balance, often through bleeding, purging, or vomiting. The farmer proudly tells you about the time he used leeches to cure a neighbour of a fever, a story you listen to with a mix of fascination and horror. He's completely earnest, completely convinced that his methods are sound. Historians still argue whether some of these herbal remedies, like the use of certain plants, had any real medicinal properties or if their perceived effectiveness was purely a result of the placebo effect. Was the farmer just lucky? Or did he, in his own way, stumble upon a folk remedy that actually helped? He also shows you a bizarre, spiky-looking concoction. It's a poultice made from onions, crushed garlic, and a substance that, you soon realize with a shudder, is powdered dried human excrement. This is a quirky tidbit that, while not a cure, was a disturbingly common belief. The idea was that the foul smell would repel the disease-carrying miasma. He explains with a straight face that the purity of the human spirit of the donor made the remedy more potent. You politely decline his offer to apply some to a small cut you have on your hand, making a mental note to stay far away from this particular remedy. You think back to the crocodile dung sunscreen you heard about from a traveller and wonder what other truly awful things people are doing in the name of health. As you sit by the fire, you realize that this is the best medical care you're likely to find outside of a major city, and it's completely based on folklore and flawed theory. The farmer is a man of good intentions, but he is fighting an invisible enemy with a collection of herbs, insects, and superstition. He tells you stories of people who tried to cure the plague by bathing in vinegar or by holding a live chicken against their buboes, hoping to draw out the poison. The stories sound insane, but they are a testament to the desperate lengths people will go to when faced with a disease they cannot comprehend. You finish your milk, thank the old man, and continue on your way, a little wiser and a lot more cautious about who you trust with your health. The farmer's place was a brief respite, but you know you can't stay. You're back on the road, and the reality of your new, solitary life begins to set in. This isn't just about avoiding a plague, it's about learning how to survive in a world where everything you once took for granted has vanished. You've had to relearn the practical logistics of everyday medieval life, but this time with the added layer of mortal terror. For instance, you're constantly on the lookout for fresh water. Back in the city, you had a well just down the street, but out here, you have to find a clean stream, and you have to be wary of those that might be contaminated by a plague-ridden village upstream. You've learned to follow the sounds of birds, which often leads you to a water source. A quirky tidbit: some people believed that bathing in urine was a good way to ward off the plague, a belief that probably had more to do with the lack of clean water than any actual medical theory. You are, thankfully, not one of them. You realize that the simple act of building a fire has become a crucial skill. You need it for warmth, for cooking the few things you can scavenge, and for protection against wild animals and, perhaps more terrifyingly, other desperate people. You learn to recognize different types of wood, to find the driest kind, and to use a flint and steel, a process that feels more like magic than a simple chore. A mainstream historical fact is that in medieval times, a person's survival was much more directly tied to their knowledge of the natural world, knowing which plants were edible, how to track game, and how to build a shelter was not just a hobby, it was a matter of life and death. You're now a student of the wilderness, and your life is the final exam. As you walk, you reflect on the tools you have. Your rusty knife is your most valuable possession. It's for protection, but also for skinning a rabbit if you're lucky enough to catch one. You also have a small leather pouch with a few coins, and you realize that money is becoming less and less useful. Bartering is the new currency. You trade a few of your coins for a small loaf of bread, but you're aware that you might have to trade a service or a possession for food soon. Historians still argue about how quickly the monetary system collapsed in the worst-hit areas. Did people abandon coins instantly? Or was it a gradual process of inflation and devaluation? For you, it's a very real and immediate problem. You stop to rest under a large oak tree. The silence of the forest, a welcome change from the chaos of the city. You think about the people you left behind, the bustling streets, the loud voices. You think about the simple comfort of a warm bed and a full meal. You are now a hunter and a gatherer, a survivalist in a world that has been turned upside down. You are no longer defined by your profession or your status, but by your ability to keep yourself alive. It's a humbling and terrifying realization. But as you watch a small squirrel scamper up a tree, you feel a small flicker of pride. You are still here, and for now, that is enough. The quiet life of a wilderness survivor can only last so long. As the days turn into weeks, you realize you need to find a more permanent place. A community that has been spared the worst of the plague. You've heard whispers of a remote, mountainous region where the disease hasn't taken hold, so you start traveling in that direction, a journey that takes you far from the familiar landscapes you've known. Your path is not just about avoiding the sickness, but about actively seeking out a place of safety, a place that, you hope, is still sane. This is a deliberate shift from running to seeking, and it's a crucial part of your survival. You're trading a temporary retreat for a permanent refuge. As you travel, you meet other people who have made the same choice. Some are families traveling together. Their faces a mix of hope and exhaustion. Others are solitary wanderers like you. You learn to read the signs of the road, the subtle clues that tell you if a place is safe or not. An abandoned cart with a dead horse is a clear sign of trouble. A well-tended field with smoke rising from a chimney is a sign of life, of a community that is still functioning. A mainstream historical fact is that this migration of people from infected to uninfected areas was a major factor in the spread of the plague. While you are trying to survive, you are also, in a way, part of the problem. It's a bitter irony. You encounter a group of people who have taken to traveling at night, believing that the pestilential wind is less potent after the sun sets. They move like ghosts, silent and swift, and you join them for a few days, finding a strange comfort in their shared, albeit flawed, belief. You keep your distance, of course. But the feeling of not being alone is a welcome change. A quirky tidbit you hear from them is a tale of a village that believed they could ward off the plague by sleeping with a live chicken pressed against their chests. The villagers all died, but you find a certain dark poetry in their desperate attempt to save themselves with something so simple and alive. Historians still argue whether the psychological impact of these bizarre rituals, which gave people a sense of control, was a net positive or a negative, as it often delayed rational action. Your journey is a testament to the sheer will to live. You face challenges you never imagined, a swollen river you must cross, a steep mountain path you must climb, a group of suspicious travelers you must avoid. But with every step, you are moving closer to a place you hope exists, a place where life is not just about survival, but about living. The world is a different place now, a canvas of grief and terror, but you are a survivor, a small brushstroke of hope against the darkness. You keep moving, your eyes on the horizon, the promise of a safer tomorrow, a beacon in the storm. You've been traveling for weeks, your journey taking you through forests and over hills. The world feels emptier, but the dread of the plague is still a heavy presence, a ghost you can't outrun. And then, you see him, standing at the edge of a path, his silhouette dark against the afternoon sun, is a figure that has become a symbol of both fear and desperate hope. It's a plague doctor. He is a terrifying sight. dressed in a long, dark coat made of waxed leather or canvas. His face is hidden behind a strange, beak-like mask, a sinister contraption filled with sweet-smelling herbs. His eyes, visible through the glass eye holes, are clinical and detached. He carries a long wooden stick, which he uses to examine patients without having to touch them. You instinctively keep your distance, a primal fear seizing you. A mainstream historical fact is that plague doctors, or Medici della Peste, were contracted by cities to treat victims of the plague. They were often not trained physicians, but rather second-rate doctors, or even simple folk who were not afraid to get their hands dirty, or, more accurately, to use their hands on the plague victims. Their primary task was to record the death toll and to perform autopsies to learn more about the disease. You see him lean over a man slumped against a tree, prodding the body with his stick. He makes a quick note on a small piece of parchment, his movements efficient and unfeeling. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of these doctors. Were they a valuable public service? Or were they simply a gruesome, macabre symbol of a world that had lost all hope? A quirky tidbit that you've heard is that the beak mask was not just for show. It was a crude but somewhat effective form of a gas mask. The beak was filled with a mixture of aromatic herbs like mint, juniper, and cloves, which the doctors believed would purify the air they breathed, warding off the miasma they thought was causing the disease. While the theory was wrong, the herbs may have helped repel fleas, the true carriers of the plague. You watch as he turns his head, the strange beak a silent, unsettling question mark. You can't help but think it looks like a raven. The image is so perfect it's almost a piece of dark art. You avoid the path he is on, making a wide circle through the dense woods. You don't want to be a patient. You don't want to be a number on his parchment. As you move away, you hear a low groan from the man on the ground, a sound of immense pain and suffering that sends a shiver down your spine. The plague doctor just stands there, a grim statue of death. His long coat and mask a testament to a world that is now so broken that it has to hire people to deal with the dying. You are a survivor, a person on the run, but he is something else. He is a man who has chosen to face the very thing you are running from. You're not sure which of you is crazier. You've made it past the plague doctor. But the world continues to present new challenges. You finally make your way to a small town that, by some miracle, seems relatively untouched. But as soon as you enter, you notice something strange. The prices are outrageous. A loaf of bread that would have cost a copper coin in your hometown is now a silver shilling. A simple pair of shoes is worth more than a month's wages. This is the economic impact of the plague in action, and you're experiencing it firsthand. With so many people dead, the supply of goods has dried up, but the few surviving labourers are now in high demand. A mainstream historical fact is that this massive labour shortage meant that surviving peasants and artisans could demand higher wages and better terms from their landlords and masters, which ultimately helped dismantle the feudal system. You talk to a blacksmith, a weary man whose forge is now silent. He tells you that his apprentices are all dead. He's working alone, trying to keep up with the demand for tools and horseshoes. But he can't. He has to turn away customers and charge a fortune for the work he does. You offer him a few coins for a small repair, and he looks at them with a kind of disdain. Paper money is useless, he grumbles. I need gold, or food, something real. The value of money is collapsing, and the old system of commerce is breaking down. Historians still argue whether this economic shift was a violent, chaotic breakdown or a necessary, if painful, transition to a new economic order. For you, it's just a new kind of struggle. A quirky tidbit that you learn from another traveller is that a new kind of currency has sprung up in some of the more isolated communities, bartering in skilled services. A cobbler might trade a pair of shoes for a season's worth of grain from a farmer. A weaver might trade a bolt of cloth for a month of protection from a group of mercenaries. Your rusty knife and your ability to build a fire are your new assets, more valuable than the coins in your pouch. It's a return to a more primitive form of economy, driven not by the whims of a king or the trade routes of a distant port, but by the raw, immediate needs of the people. You walk through the market, a place that feels less like a centre of commerce and more like a stage for desperate transactions. People are trading family heirlooms for sacks of flour and fine silks for a few salted fish. The old social order is gone, and the new one is based on who has what you need. Right now, the wealthy are often the most vulnerable in this new world. Their coins are worthless. Their land is unworkable without labor, and their fine clothes can't be eaten. You see a man in a fine velvet tunic, a nobleman by the looks of him, trying to trade his signet ring for a single chicken. The farmer just shakes his head, his face a mask of pity and contempt. It's a cruel new world, and the poor and the skilled are suddenly in a position of power, and you, a simple survivor, are learning how to navigate it, one desperate trade at a time. You've heard whispers of a castle, a great stone fortress on a hill that has supposedly sealed itself off from the plague. The Lord and his court, it is said, are living a normal life behind its massive walls, protected from the chaos and disease that ravage the world outside. This sounds like a fairy tale. But in your desperate state, you decide to seek it out. You travel for days, your journey a series of winding roads and lonely trails, until you finally see it on the horizon, a massive stone structure, its towers reaching for the sky, its walls a testament to a strength that seems to defy the plague itself. You feel a strange mix of hope and despair. Is this a sanctuary or a gilded cage? As you approach, you see that the castle is a self-sufficient world. There are fields within the outer walls, tended by the surviving serfs. There are wells, a mill, and a small church. The castle gate is not just a barrier, it's a statement. It is a symbol of a world that has decided to simply wall itself off from the rest of humanity. A mainstream historical fact is that many nobles and wealthy families did exactly this, retreating to their isolated castles and estates, hoping to survive the plague in seclusion. While this offered a measure of protection from direct exposure, it didn't make them immune. The plague could still be carried in by a servant, a tradesman, or even a rat. Historians still argue whether this act of self-preservation was a sign of shrewd survival or a selfish abandonment of their people. For you, it's a very real and very imposing barrier. You are denied entry. Of course, the guards on the battlements, their faces grim, tell you that no one is allowed in or out. You stand at the foot of the castle, a small, insignificant figure, and feel the immense weight of the class divide. The lord and his family are safe, and you are not. A quirky tidbit you hear from a local peasant is that the lord's son, a boy of 12, had tried to sneak out to see the world, but he was caught and confined to his room. His father, the lord, had told him that the real world was gone, and that the castle was all that was left. You can't help but feel a pang of pity for the boy. He is safe from the plague, but he is a prisoner in his own home. He is a survivor. But at what cost? You sit by a fire outside the castle walls, watching the smoke rise from the chimneys. The people inside are having dinner, their lives continuing in a bizarre kind of normalcy. You are a witness to a world that is not just divided by plague, but by wealth and privilege. The castle is a fortress against disease, but it's also a fortress against the rest of humanity. You realize that your journey is not just about finding a safe place, it's about finding a place where you belong, a community that is still functioning, not just surviving behind a wall of stone. You get up, dust yourself off, and continue your journey. The castle, you realize, is not a sanctuary, it's a tomb for the living. After leaving the cold stone walls of the castle behind, you find yourself on a path leading toward a monastery. Monasteries, you've heard, were often centers of learning, their libraries filled with precious manuscripts and ancient texts. The thought of finding a book, any book, feels like a lifeline to a world that is rapidly disappearing. You imagine a quiet scriptorium, monks bent over desks, their hands illuminating pages while the world outside burns. You hope that in this place of piety and learning, you might find not just a physical sanctuary, but a mental one. A mainstream historical fact is that monasteries were indeed crucial repositories of knowledge during the Middle Ages, their libraries containing works on everything from theology to medicine to ancient Greek philosophy. They were the intellectual heart of a largely illiterate society. You are granted entry to the monastery, but the atmosphere inside is not what you expected. It's somber and quiet, but not in a peaceful way. The monks are thin, their eyes hollow with grief. You learn that the plague has been particularly cruel to them, as their close communal living arrangements made them easy targets. The library is still there, a magnificent room with floor-to-ceiling shelves. But many of the books are gone, burned in a desperate attempt to cleanse the monastery of the disease. A quirky tidbit you hear is that the abbot, in his panic, had decreed that any book with a red cover was to be burned, believing that the color red was a sign of the devil. The logic is, of course, completely insane, but the fear is real. You can't help but feel a pang of sadness for all the knowledge that was lost. You find a monk who is still sane enough to talk. He tells you that the plague has fundamentally changed their work. Instead of copying sacred texts, they are now copying last wills and testaments. Instead of debating theology, they are debating the best way to dispose of the dead. He shows you a book, not on philosophy, but on practical farming techniques. A book that he says is now more valuable than any sacred text. This is a grim reality. The practical has replaced the profound. Historians still argue whether the destruction of books and the loss of educated monks was a major setback for the Renaissance and the advancement of knowledge, or if the plague's long-term effect of creating a new intellectual class ultimately spurred a rebirth of learning. You spend a night in a small, cold cell, and you read by the light of a single candle. The book you're reading is not a grand philosophical treatise, but a simple text on herbal remedies. It's filled with crude drawings of plants and simple instructions on how to use them. It's a testament to the new world you're living in, a world where the old knowledge is fading and the new knowledge is about survival. You feel a strange sense of comfort in the simplicity of the text. It's not about grand ideas or divine purpose. It's about staying alive. You realize that the monastery, once a beacon of learning, is now just another place trying to survive. You leave the next morning, but you take the book with you. The monk, his face a mask of grief, doesn't object. He knows that knowledge, like life, must find a way to endure. Leaving the monastery with your precious book, you continue your journey. You find yourself in a world where the old feudal system, the rigid social hierarchy that dictated everything from who you served to what you ate, is starting to crumble. With so many people dead, the land is still there, but the hands to work it are not. A mainstream historical fact is that the death of a massive portion of the peasant population gave the survivors unprecedented leverage. For the first time in generations, you and others like you are not tied to the land. If a lord demands too much, you can simply leave and find another who is willing to offer better wages or more favorable terms. This newfound mobility is a game changer. You walk through a village where the lord is desperately trying to convince the few remaining families to stay. He promises them land, a small cottage, and even a portion of the harvest. Things he would never have offered before. The peasants, once meek and subservient, are now listening with a skeptical air. They know their worth. They know that they are the lifeblood of the Lord's estate, and without them, the land is worthless. This is a quiet revolution, a change happening not through war or rebellion, but through the simple, brutal reality of numbers. The plague has unintentionally become the great equalizer, and you are a witness to its long-term effects. Historians still argue whether the decline of the feudal system was an inevitable part of social evolution, or if the plague simply accelerated a process that was already underway. A quirky tidbit you hear from a fellow traveller is the story of a peasant who, after his entire family died, simply walked off the land and started a new life as a freelance labourer. He now works for multiple lords, charging a premium for his services, and he lives a life of freedom he never could have imagined before the plague. He is a new kind of man, a man of no lord, a man who sells his labour to the highest bidder. You can't help but feel a flicker of admiration for his courage. He has turned a tragedy into an opportunity. And he is, in his own small way, forging a new world. You see a lord on his horse, riding through his fields, a look of despair on his face. The fields are full of weeds. The harvest is rotting, and there is no one to tend to it. He is a king without a kingdom, a shepherd without a flock. The power he once held has been diluted by the sheer absence of people. You walk past him, a nobody, a survivor, and you feel a sense of power you've never felt before. The old world is dying, and a new one, a more fluid and less rigid one, is being born. You are a part of that new world, a small piece of a much larger puzzle, and your journey is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable change. Your journey has led you to a small, isolated village. The people here are poor but resilient. As you rest in the village square, you witness a disturbing scene. A group of men, their faces a mask of rage and despair, are confronting a young woman. They accuse her of being a witch, of bringing the plague to their village through a dark pact with the devil. The woman, terrified, swears her innocence, but her pleas fall on deaf ears. They drag her away, and you can't bring yourself to watch what happens next. The social breakdown you witnessed in the larger towns has now taken a darker, more personal turn. A mainstream historical fact is that the fear and hysteria of the Black Death often led to the persecution of marginalized groups, including women accused of witchcraft, Jewish communities, and other outsiders. In a world without a clear scientific explanation, people turned to scapegoats, and the consequences were brutal. You talk to an old man who is sitting by himself, whittling a small piece of wood. He tells you that his son, a young man of 20, had joined a peasant revolt in the next county. The Lord, he says, had refused to pay the workers what they were now worth, and the young men had risen up in anger. He shakes his head sadly. They were all killed, he says. But they died for a cause. This is a powerful, if grim, example of how the plague was fundamentally altering the social order. The old man tells you that for the first time in his life, he feels a sense of hope, a sense of a new world being born out of the ashes of the old. Historians still argue about whether these peasant revolts, many of which were brutally suppressed, were a direct result of the plague or if they were a natural consequence of the changing economic landscape. For you, it's a very real and very personal story of a family torn apart by a changing world. A quirky tidbit you hear is that some peasants, in their rage against the old order, started wearing the clothes of the dead lords. They would wear a fancy doublet over their simple smock, a silk scarf around their neck. It was a bizarre, almost carnival-like protest, a way of mocking the old hierarchies and celebrating their newfound freedom. You can't help but find a certain dark humor in the image of a dirt-covered farmer wearing the clothes of a dead nobleman. It's a sign of a world that is not just changing, but is also trying to find a new identity. You are a survivor, a witness to a world that is losing its mind, but also finding a new kind of courage. The old systems are collapsing, the old beliefs are being challenged, and the people are reacting in ways that are both terrifying and inspiring. You realize that your journey is not just about staying alive, it's about watching a world die and a new one being born. And you, a simple person, are at the very center of it all. You've escaped the witch trials and the peasant revolts, but your journey continues. The plague, you're realizing, is not just a disease that kills people, it's a force that shatters the very fabric of society, including the most fundamental unit, the family. You pass by an abandoned cottage, its door hanging ajar, its garden choked with weeds. You find a small, wooden doll on the ground, a single tear staining its painted face. It's a somber reminder of the children and families torn apart by the plague. A mainstream historical fact is that children were particularly vulnerable to the disease, and the loss of entire families left many orphans. The social structure, once based on family ties and lineage, was irrevocably changed, and the roles of men, women, and children were forced to adapt. You meet a family on the road, a mother and her 2 small children. The father is gone, a victim of the plague. The mother, a woman who once would have relied on her husband for everything, is now the sole provider and protector. She carries a small sack of provisions and holds her children's hands, her face a mask of weary determination. You offer her some of your meager food, and she accepts with a grateful nod. This is a grim new reality. A quirky tidbit you hear from her is that in her village, they had a folk rhyme that they would sing to their children, a macabre lullaby that was meant to teach them about the plague, but also, in a strange way, to comfort them. The rhyme talks about a ring of roses and a pocket full of posies, a reference to the herbs people would carry to ward off the miasma. The song is a sad and haunting echo of a world that is losing its innocence. You think about your own family, a memory that is now both precious and painful. You wonder what happened to them, if they survived, if they are even still in the world. The plague has created a world of ghosts, of people who are not just dead, but who are simply gone. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of this mass loss of life on the surviving population. Was it a collective trauma that scarred a generation, or did it lead to a new kind of resilience, a new appreciation for the preciousness of life? You can't answer that question, but you can feel the weight of it in the air, in the quiet conversations and the somber faces of the people you meet. You spend a night by a fire with the mother and her children. The children are asleep, their faces peaceful in the firelight. The mother looks at you, her eyes filled with a sadness that is deeper than words. "We are all that's left," she says quietly. You don't have to ask what she means. You know. The world has been emptied, and the few survivors are left to rebuild, to create a new kind of family, a new kind of community. You are a part of that, a small piece of a new world being born out of the ashes of the old. You look at the children, their faces innocent and trusting, and you realize that your journey is not just about your own survival, it's about the survival of a new generation. The journey has been long, and your supplies are running low. You decide to make a detour to what was once a prosperous town, hoping to find something you can salvage or trade. The town is eerily quiet, the silence broken only by the wind whistling through the empty streets. You see a bank, a small, stone building that once held the wealth of the town. The door is hanging ajar, and you can see that the interior has been ransacked. The ledgers are scattered on the floor, and the strongboxes are all empty. The concept of medieval banking, once so crucial to commerce and trade, has been completely shattered by the plague. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval banks, often run by Italian merchants, were based on trust and a complex system of credit and letters of exchange, but with the death of so many merchants, clients, and bankers, this system collapsed. The plague didn't just kill people, it killed the very idea of a stable financial system. Without a functioning economy, your few remaining coins feel like a cruel joke. Historians still argue whether the collapse of these banks led to the eventual development of a more robust financial system, or if it was a catastrophic setback that took generations to recover from. For you, it's a very real and very immediate problem. You enter the bank, a sense of morbid curiosity pulling you in. You find a small, leather-bound book on the floor. It's a ledger, filled with the names of people who owed money and those who were owed money. You recognize a few names, people you knew who are now surely dead. The numbers and figures feel meaningless. A quirky tidbit you find is a small, hand-drawn caricature on the last page of the ledger, a cartoon of the banker himself. A plump man with a greedy expression on his face. The humor is lost on you, but it's a grim reminder of a world that once was. You leave the bank, your hands empty, but with a new understanding of the world you're in. The old forms of wealth, the coins, the ledgers, the promises of credit are now worthless. The only wealth that matters is the clothes on your back, the food in your pack, and the skills in your hands. You are a living example of a world that has been reset, a world where the only currency is survival. You think back to the nobleman you saw trying to trade his signet ring for a chicken. He, too, was a victim of this new reality. The plague, in its brutal efficiency, has stripped away the illusion of wealth and power, leaving only the raw, messy business of staying alive. After the grim lesson of the empty bank, you find yourself approaching a large, sprawling market. It's not a formal market like the one in your hometown. This is a chaotic, makeshift gathering of people, a testament to the new reality. Here, people are not just trading goods, they're trading information and hope. The air is thick with the smells of roasting meat and unwashed bodies. A bizarre mix of life and death. You see a man selling old clothes, another trading tools for a sack of grain, and a third offering to sharpen knives for a small price. This is the new economy in action. A mainstream historical fact is that during the plague, many formal markets collapsed, and these unofficial, ad hoc gatherings became crucial for the survival of communities. They were often a hotbed of rumor and gossip. As people desperately sought information about the plague's spread, you try to sell your rusty knife, but a man offers you a small, polished stone instead. "It has healing properties," he whispers, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and greed. You politely decline, knowing that a stone, no matter how pretty, won't save you. This is a common scene, a quirky tidbit you've come to expect, people selling strange, often useless items with the promise of a cure or protection. You see a woman trying to sell a plague-repelling cat, a scrawny, flea-ridden animal that looks more likely to carry the disease than repel it. The sheer desperation is a tangible thing, a heavy cloud that hangs over the market. As you navigate the crowd, you hear snippets of conversation, One man is talking about a new citywide burial system, a grim but necessary innovation. Another is talking about a lord who has started to pay his workers in land instead of coins, a sign of the changing times. The market, for all its chaos, is a vital lifeline. It's a place where the new world is being born, one small, desperate transaction at a time. Historians still argue about whether these informal markets helped spread the plague faster, as they were often unregulated and crowded, or if they were a vital part of the social and economic recovery, allowing communities to function even in the face of immense death and loss. You find a small, quiet corner and sit down, watching the human spectacle. You see a young couple, their faces full of hope, trading a piece of jewelry for a sack of flour. You see an old man, his eyes full of despair, trading his last possession for a single, warm meal. The market is a microcosm of the plague-ridden world, a place of both tragedy and resilience. You realize that your journey is not just about your own survival, it's about watching a world try to rebuild itself, piece by agonizing piece. You are a part of that rebuilding, a small witness to a world that is finding a new way to live. The chaos of the market is a grim reminder of the old world's demise, but it's also where you learn of the fate of the powerful. You hear a story about the city's most influential merchant family, the Bellamys. They were the wealthiest people in town. Their fortune built on trade and political connections, but as the plague swept through the city, they were not spared. Their lavish manor, once the center of grand balls and feasts, is now a silent, ghostly shell. A mainstream historical fact is that the plague was a great equalizer. It didn't discriminate based on wealth or status. While the rich had some advantages, like the ability to flee to a secluded castle, as you saw, they were just as susceptible to the disease as the poor. You hear a rumor, a quirky tidbit whispered in a dark corner of the market, that the Bellamy family's downfall was hastened by their own greed. They had hoarded food and supplies in their manor, thinking they could weather the storm, but the plague found its way in through a servant, and the entire family was wiped out. Their hoard of food, which could have fed a small village, was left to rot, a cruel monument to their arrogance. Meanwhile, a new family, a family of simple farmers who had been smart enough to leave the city early, has bought the Bellamy's land for a pittance. The old order is dying, and a new one is being born from the ashes. Historians still argue whether the plague was a curse or a blessing, a terrible tragedy that brought about a more equitable society or a brutal act of nature that simply rearranged the deck chairs on a sinking ship. You see a young man, a former servant of the Bellamys, now a successful merchant in his own right, trading spices from the east. He tells you that his master's death was a kind of freedom. He was no longer a servant, but a man with his own destiny. The plague, in its brutal efficiency, has created a world of opportunity for those who were brave enough to seize it. The old families are gone, and new ones, built on resilience and a quick mind, are taking their place. You see the young merchant, his eyes full of a new kind of pride, and you realize that you are a part of this new world, a world where your worth is not determined by your lineage, but by your ability to survive. As you continue your journey, you find a new kind of silence in the world. The bustling art of the old world is gone, but a new, more somber form of expression has taken its place. You enter a village and see a man carving a small wooden statue. It's not a statue of a saint or a king, but a statue of a simple farmer. His face gaunt and his body covered in boils. It's a grim, raw piece of art, a testament to the new reality. A mainstream historical fact is that the plague had a profound impact on art, music, and literature. The focus shifted from the divine and the noble to the human and the mortal. The art became more macabre, often depicting skeletons, death, and the suffering of the common man. You stop to listen to a group of people singing. The songs are not the joyous ballads of old, but mournful, dirge-like tunes about lost loved ones and the fragility of life. This new music, a quirky tidbit you find both beautiful and sad, is a form of collective grieving, a way for people to process the immense trauma they have endured. The music is simple, often just a single voice and a lute, but its power is immense. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a way of finding beauty in the face of immense suffering. Historians still argue whether this dark, melancholic art was a sign of a society in decline or a necessary part of the healing process, a way of confronting the trauma head-on. You find a piece of parchment with a poem written on it. The poem is not about knights and ladies, but about a farmer who lost his entire family to the plague. The words are simple, but they are filled with a raw, emotional power that you find deeply moving. This new literature, a reflection of the new world, is a literature of survival. It's a literature that speaks to the common man, a literature that is born out of the ashes of a dying world. You feel a sense of connection to the author, a sense of shared pain and shared hope. The old world's art was about the gods and the powerful, but the new world's art is about you, a simple survivor, a witness to a world that is not just changing, but is also finding a new voice. You continue your journey, but you carry the memory of the art and music with you, leaving the village of sad songs and grim art. You find yourself drawn to a new kind of sanctuary, a monastery, not a fortress of knowledge like the one you saw before, but a small, humble community of monks who have, against all odds, managed to survive. Their secret, you soon learn, is not divine intervention, but a strict adherence to their rules and a quiet isolation. They have sealed their community off from the world, refusing entry to all outsiders, even fellow monks from other cloisters. A mainstream historical fact is that many religious communities, particularly those in remote locations, had a higher rate of survival during the plague due to their isolated nature, their communal lifestyle, while a risk in a city was a blessing in the wilderness. You find yourself sitting outside the monastery walls, a small fire keeping you warm, and you watch the monks go about their daily routines. They work in the fields, they pray in the small chapel, and they share meals in a silent, solemn dining hall. They are a living testament to the power of a strict, disciplined life. You are a survivor, a person on the run, but they are something else. They are a community that has found a way to not just survive, but to endure. Historians still argue about the philosophical implications of this survival. Did their faith save them? Or was it their practicality? Was their isolation a sign of piety or a sign of selfishness? A quirky tidbit you learn from a passing traveller is that some monasteries, in their desperation, started to experiment with new kinds of herbal remedies, even growing strange, exotic plants in their gardens in the hope of finding a cure. They were a strange mix of faith and science, of prayer and practical experimentation. You can't help but feel a pang of admiration for their resilience, their ability to adapt to a world that is so brutally unforgiving. You look at the walls of the monastery, and you don't see a prison. You see a lifeboat, a small, fragile vessel of humanity that has managed to survive the storm. Leaving the monastery, you are back on the open road. Your journey, however, has taught you that isolation can be a powerful tool for survival. As you travel, you start to seek out the small, remote villages that dot the landscape. These are not the bustling towns of the old world, but tight-knit communities of farmers and artisans. A mainstream historical fact is that many of these small, remote villages were spared the worst of the plague simply because they were isolated. They had little to no contact with the major trade routes and were self-sufficient, meaning the plague had no easy way to get to them. You approach a village, and you are met not with suspicion, but with a cautious welcome. The people here are not terrified. They are sober, but they are also working. They are planting crops, mending fences, and raising their children. You notice that their sanitation is still poor by modern standards, but it's a closed system. The waste stays in the village, and the village has no outsiders. This is a crucial point of your survival. You're no longer seeking a place that is fighting the plague, you're seeking a place that is simply not exposed to it. Historians still argue about whether the survival of these villages was a result of luck, deliberate isolation, or a natural immunity that developed over time. A quirky tidbit you learn from a local elder is that in their village, they have a tradition of passing the light. Whenever someone dies, a single candle is lit in the center of the village, and it is tended to by a new family every night. It's a simple ritual, but it's a powerful symbol of their resilience and their commitment to staying a community. The light, they say, is a reminder that even in the face of immense darkness, there is still hope. The tradition, you realize, is a way of collectively grieving and of finding a new kind of strength. You decide to stay for a while. The village is not a utopia, but it's a place where life is continuing. You work in the fields, you help mend a fence, and you share a meal with a family. You are no longer a solitary survivor, but a part of a community. You're learning that survival is not just about staying alive, it's about finding a place to belong, a place where you can rebuild not just your life, but your sense of humanity. The world outside may be in chaos, but in this small, remote village, there is still a sense of order, a sense of hope. You feel a sense of peace you haven't felt since before the plague. You've found a temporary haven in the small village, a place of peace and resilience, but you know you can't stay forever. The world outside is still in flux, and you are a traveller at heart. As you prepare to leave, you reflect on the trade routes you once knew. The old routes, which once brought silks and spices from the east, are now gone, but new ones, born out of necessity and survival, are being forged. A mainstream historical fact is that the plague's disruption of old trade routes and economic centres led to the rise of new ones, often in previously underdeveloped areas. The old powerhouses of commerce were weakened, and new ones, built on the resilience and ingenuity of the survivors, were taking their place. You meet a young man who has made a small fortune by trading in salt, a commodity that is now more valuable than gold. He travels on foot, a small cart pulled by a donkey, and he avoids the major roads, preferring the smaller, safer paths. He is a new kind of merchant, a man of the new world. He tells you a quirky tidbit about how some of the old trade guilds, once so powerful and exclusive, have completely collapsed. In their place are freelance artisans and traders, people who have learned to be self-sufficient and adaptable. The old rules of commerce are gone, and a new, more fluid and merit-based system is taking its place. You see a woman selling handmade wooden dolls, each one a grim but beautiful reminder of a child lost to the plague. She is not a wealthy merchant, but she is a survivor, and her art is her currency. She trades a doll for a few sacks of flour, a transaction that is both economic and deeply personal. Historians still argue whether the post-plague economic landscape was a more equitable one, where skilled labour and ingenuity were valued more than lineage and wealth, or if it was a brutal, dog-eat-dog world where only the ruthless and the lucky survived. As you leave the village, you feel a new sense of purpose. You're not just a survivor, you are an observer, a witness to a world that is not just dying, but is also being reborn. The old ways are gone, but the human spirit, in all its resilience and ingenuity, is finding a way to continue. You are a part of that continuation, a small piece of a new world being born out of the ashes of the old. Your journey continues, but you are no longer just running. You are seeking out the new world, a world that is being built by people like you, leaving the bustling, chaotic new market behind. You continue on your journey. The world has changed in ways both economic and social, but the most profound changes, you realize, are happening inside people's minds. The plague has not just killed people, it has shattered their worldview, their sense of purpose, and their understanding of the very nature of life and death. The cultural and psychological toll is a tangible thing, a heavy weight that hangs in the air, a silence that is more terrifying than any sound. A mainstream historical fact is that the sheer scale of the death and the brutal, inexplicable nature of the plague led to a widespread sense of existential dread and a questioning of long-held beliefs. You meet a man sitting by a river, throwing stones into the water. He tells you that his entire family is gone. He's not crying, he's just empty. He talks about how the old world had a clear order, a clear purpose. You were born, you worked, you died, and you went to heaven. But now, he says, the lines are blurred. He saw good people die and bad people survive. He saw priests and beggars, nobles and peasants, all fall to the same disease. He's struggling with the idea of a just God, a God who would allow such a thing to happen. This is the profound philosophical shift that the plague has brought about. Historians still argue whether this widespread questioning of faith led to a more secular society, or if it simply paved the way for new, more radical forms of religious belief. A quirky tidbit you hear is that some people started to have an almost obsessive fascination with death. They would paint macabre pictures of skeletons dancing with the living, a motif known as the danse macabre. They would write grim poems and sing sad songs. It was a way of confronting the terror, a way of normalizing the unthinkable. You see a small boy with a homemade wooden skeleton on a string, a toy he plays with, a grim reminder of a world that is losing its innocence. This new fascination with death is both morbid and, in a strange way, a sign of a society trying to heal. You sit with the man by the river, watching the stones splash into the water. He's not looking for a cure. He's not looking for a new home. He's looking for a reason. He's looking for a way to make sense of a world that has stopped making sense. You realize that your journey is not just about your own survival, it's about witnessing the survival of the human spirit. A spirit that is not just fighting a disease, but is also fighting to find meaning in the chaos. You leave the man to his thoughts, but his quiet despair, his silent questioning, stays with you. As you continue your journey, you notice a subtle but profound change in the roles of women. With so many men dead, the traditional social order has been thrown into chaos, and women are stepping into new roles out of necessity. You see a woman working in a field, a plough in her hand, her face a mask of determination. She is not just a farmer's wife, she is the farmer. Another woman is running a small blacksmith shop, her arms strong and her face smudged with soot. This is a mainstream historical fact. The immense death toll from the plague created a labour shortage that forced women to take on jobs and roles traditionally held by men for the first time in generations. They were no longer confined to the home. You stop to talk to the blacksmith. A woman named Eleanor. She tells you that her husband died, and she had a choice: starve or learn his trade. She chose the latter. She is not just a blacksmith, she is a mother and a widow. And she is the sole provider for her family. She is a woman of the new world, a woman who has been forged in the fire of a global pandemic. Historians still argue whether this new independence for women was a lasting change or a temporary blip that was eventually reversed when the male population recovered. For you, it's a very real and very inspiring sight. A quirky tidbit you learn from Eleanor is that in some villages, women have started to form their own guilds, a sort of trade union for female labourers. They share their skills, they help each other with work, and they provide a sense of community in a world that is so fractured. These guilds are a sign of a new kind of social order, a world where people are not just surviving, but are also finding a new way to live and work together. You feel a sense of hope, a sense of a new world being born, a world where the old rules no longer apply. You've seen the new world being born, a world of new roles and new economies, but your journey takes you back in time, in a way. As you come across the ruins of a much older city, the stones are crumbling, the columns are toppled, and the intricate carvings are worn by centuries of wind and rain. This is a Roman city, a ghost from an age long past, and it offers a stark comparison to the world you now live in. You walk through the remains of a public bathhouse. Its once magnificent marble floors now covered in weeds and dust. A mainstream historical fact is that the Romans were masters of public sanitation, with a complex system of aqueducts, sewers, and public latrines that were far more advanced than anything you've seen in your own time. You stand by a ruined latrine, a long bench with holes carved into it, and you marvel at the audacity of it all. The Romans, in their time, had a public system of shared toilets, a concept that is so foreign to your plague-ridden world that it feels like a work of fiction. This is the irony. 1,000 years ago, people were living in a world of relative cleanliness, and now, in your own time, people are dying in filth. This is a grim reminder that progress is not always linear. Historians still argue whether the Romans' impressive sanitation systems truly protected them from pandemics, or if their dense urban populations were still vulnerable to disease. A quirky tidbit you learn from a passing historian, a man with a strange, bookish air who is also touring the ruins, is that the Romans believed in a goddess of sewers, a deity named Cloacina. They would offer sacrifices and prayers to her, hoping to keep their cities clean and their diseases at bay. The idea of a goddess of human waste is so bizarre and charmingly absurd that you can't help but laugh. It's a small moment of levity in a world of immense darkness. You walk through the ruins. The ghosts of the past are silent, powerful presence. You realize that your own time, for all its struggles and its despair, is not the first to deal with a world-changing disease. There have been plagues before, and there will likely be plagues again. Your journey is not just a personal one, it's a part of a much larger human story. The ruins of the old Roman city were a somber reminder of a world that once was. But your journey is one of survival, not just of observation. You realize that the land routes are growing more and more dangerous, with lawless bandits and desperate travelers. So, you decide to make a new move. A bold one. You're going to try to escape the plague by sea. You make your way to a small fishing village on the coast, a place that, you hope, has been spared the worst of the plague. You find a fisherman, a gruff old man with a face like a dried apple, and you offer him your last few coins for passage. He agrees, but he warns you that the sea is a harsh mistress, and the plague is not the only danger. A mainstream historical fact is that many people, in a desperate attempt to escape the plague, took to the seas. While a ship could offer a measure of isolation, it was not a guarantee of safety. The plague could be carried on board by a person, a flea, or even a rat in the cargo hold. The cramped quarters of a ship were, in many ways, an ideal environment for the disease to spread. You find yourself crammed into the hold of a small fishing vessel with a handful of other desperate souls. The air is thick with the smell of fish and fear. This is a very different kind of quarantine, a moving one, and it's just as terrifying as the one you left behind. Historians still argue whether fleeing by sea was a wise survival strategy or a high-risk gamble that, for most, did not pay off. A quirky tidbit you hear from the old fisherman is that in some ports, ships were now being painted with a strange, striped pattern. The stripes, he says, are a signal to other ships that they are a plague-free vessel. The pattern is completely arbitrary. Of course, a superstition born out of fear and a lack of real knowledge, but it's a sign of a world that is desperately trying to create new rules, new systems, new rituals to deal with a world-ending event. You can't help but find a certain dark humor in the idea of a striped ship, a vessel of hope sailing on a sea of despair. You spend your days at sea, watching the horizon, hoping to see a new land, a new home. The sea is vast and unforgiving, but it's also beautiful. You watch the sun rise and set over the waves, and you feel a strange sense of peace. The plague, for a few days, is a distant memory, a nightmare you've managed to outrun, but you know it's still out there, a silent, invisible killer waiting for you to make a mistake. The sea is a gamble, but it's a gamble you had to take. The time at sea was a brutal lesson in survival, but you've made it. You arrive at a new coast, a land that, by all accounts, has been spared the worst of the plague. As you step onto the shore, you feel a strange sense of unreality. The people here look healthy, the towns are bustling, the world is normal, but you, a survivor of a plague-ridden continent, are no longer normal. You carry the plague not just in your memory, but in your very being. A mainstream historical fact is that the Black Death had a profound and lasting genetic and biological effect on the surviving population. The plague acted as a powerful selection pressure, a brutal sieve that favored those with certain genetic traits that offered some protection against the disease. You learn from a local healer, a wise old woman with kind eyes, that there's a rumor that some people are now immune to the plague. They can walk through a plague-ridden town without fear. Their body's a fortress against the disease. This isn't a magical immunity, it's a genetic one. A quirky tidbit is that the plague may have selected for a genetic mutation in a gene called CCR5, which also happens to provide resistance to HIV. This is a fascinating link between two seemingly unrelated diseases, and it's a testament to the long-term, invisible effects of a global pandemic. Historians still argue about the extent of this genetic shift. Was it a significant change that altered the course of human evolution, or was it a minor blip that had little lasting impact? You spend your days in this new land, but you are always aware of your past. You are a survivor, but you're also a changed person. You have seen a world die and a new one be born. The scars you carry are not just physical, they are mental and emotional. You are a living testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a person who has endured the unthinkable and has, in some small way, been changed by it forever. You are a piece of living history, a person who has seen the end of one world and the beginning of another. You are a survivor, a witness, and a harbinger of a new age. You've made it to a new land, a new life. But the memory of the plague and the lessons it taught you, Linger. You're no longer just a person. You are a living repository of knowledge. You find yourself in a town that has been spared, and you are asked to speak to a group of healers. They are curious about the plague doctors, the flagellants, and the bizarre remedies you've witnessed. You tell them about the beak masks, the belief in miasma, and the strange concoctions of herbs and human waste. This is where you get to see a real-life medical textbook from the time, a collection of scrolls and parchments that, to your modern eyes, looks more like a book of spells than a book of medicine. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval medical textbooks, such as the Lilium Medicinae by Bernard de Gordon, were often a strange mix of ancient Greek and Roman medical theories, astrological beliefs, and practical observations. They were often beautifully illustrated, but their medical advice was, by and large, completely wrong. You see a drawing of a man being bled by leeches, a procedure that, to your new, enlightened mind, seems insane. The textbook explains that this is a way to balance the humours, the four fluids that were believed to govern the body. Historians still argue whether these textbooks, for all their flaws, were a crucial part of the intellectual tradition that eventually led to modern medicine, or if they were a hindrance to true scientific progress. You read a quirky tidbit from the textbook, a recipe for a plague cure that involves a mixture of powdered emeralds, rosewater, and a pinch of gold dust. The cure, of course, is completely useless, but the belief in it is a testament to the desperate lengths people would go to. You tell the healers that the real cure was not in a book or in a potion, but in a simple, common-sense approach. Isolation. You tell them about the small, remote villages that survived because they were cut off from the rest of the world. You tell them about the importance of clean water and clean air. You are a survivor, but you are also a teacher, a person who has seen the truth and is now trying to share it with a world that is still in the dark. You are a living testament to the power of a single, correct idea in a world of 1,000 wrong ones. Your stories of plague doctors and desperate remedies have a profound effect on the healers. They listen intently, their faces a mix of horror and fascination. You realize you are not just a survivor, you are a living archive. You tell them about the stories of real-life survivors, the ones who made the right choices, often by sheer luck or instinct. You speak of the family who fled to the mountains and lived off the land, surviving not by medicine but by isolation. You tell them about the merchant who, seeing the city's port closed, took his goods overland and found a new, thriving market in an isolated town. A man who survived not by luck but by ingenuity. A mainstream historical fact is that many of the stories we have of the plague are not from the rich or the powerful, but from the common people who left behind letters, diaries, and even oral histories. These accounts, for all their biases and superstitions, are a crucial part of our understanding of the Black Death. You tell the healers about a quirky tidbit you heard from a travelling minstrel, a story of a young man who survived the plague by sealing himself in a wine cellar for 3 months, drinking only the wine he had with him. He emerged gaunt and pale, but alive, and with a new appreciation for the simple pleasures of life. The story is a grim but powerful testament to the sheer will to live. Historians still argue whether the stories of these lucky survivors are a genuine representation of the choices people made, or if they are simply a form of folklore, a way for people to make sense of a tragedy that had no rhyme or reason. As you finish your stories, the healers look at you with a new kind of respect. You are no longer just a traveller. You are a source of knowledge, a person who has seen the fire and has come back to tell the tale. You are a living testament to the fact that survival is not always a matter of medicine or luck. It's often a matter of common sense, a quick mind, and a willingness to do the unthinkable. You feel a sense of purpose you haven't felt since before the plague. You are a survivor, but you are also a teacher, a person who is helping to write the new history of a changed world. Your stories of survival and folk remedies have left the healers with much to ponder. You've given them a perspective they couldn't find in their scrolls, a grim but vital window into the reality of the plague. Now, as you spend more time in this new, relatively untouched land, you start to see the early stages of a new kind of social progress. The town leaders, hearing your tales of the urban collapse, are taking action. They're not just praying, they're planning. A mainstream historical fact is that the Black Death, for all its horror, acted as a catalyst for the creation of new public health laws and institutions. Cities began to realize that the health of the community was a civic responsibility, not just a matter of divine will. You witness the creation of a new hospital, a clean, well-lit building that is not just a place for the sick to die, but a place for them to be cared for. The town leaders have decreed that anyone showing signs of illness will be brought here, not just left in the streets. You are asked to consult on the design, and you suggest that it be built on the outskirts of town, away from the main populace. This is a simple, logical step, but it is one that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Historians still argue about whether these new hospitals were truly effective in preventing the spread of disease, or if they simply became a new kind of death trap. For you, it's a very real and very hopeful sign of progress. A quirky tidbit you learn is that the town leaders have also created a new role, the public health officer. This person's job is not to cure the sick, but to enforce the new laws, to ensure that the streets are kept clean, that waste is properly disposed of, and that the water supply is protected. This is a radical, new idea. A person whose sole job is to keep the community healthy. You can't help but feel a sense of pride. You, a simple survivor, have helped to create a new world, a world where the lessons of the past are not forgotten, but are used to build a better future. You are a small, quiet part of a massive change, and the feeling is both humbling and empowering. You are no longer just running, you are building. The new public health laws and hospitals are a testament to the town's ability to learn from your grim tales, but you've also seen how quickly logic can be abandoned in the face of fear. You encounter a group of children playing a game, and it's a strange and macabre one. They are throwing small, smooth stones at a wooden doll, shouting, "Plague, plague, go away." This is a grim but powerful example of the strange legacy of plague myths and folklore. These stories and rituals, often passed down through generations, are a way for people to process a trauma that they don't have the words for. A mainstream historical fact is that the Black Death gave rise to a whole host of myths and superstitions. The myth of the pestilential wind, the idea of plague doctors with their beak masks, and the folk songs about the disease are all a part of this legacy. These stories, while not scientifically accurate, were a crucial part of the social and psychological fabric of the post-plague world. You, a survivor, are now a part of this legacy. Your stories, for all their truth, are now being retold in a new way, with new details and new meanings. Historians still argue whether these myths and folklores were a healthy way of dealing with trauma, or if they simply reinforced a worldview based on fear and superstition. A quirky tidbit you hear is that some people started to believe that the plague was caused by a curse from a long-dead witch. They would go to her grave and perform strange rituals, hoping to appease her spirit and stop the disease. The story is, of course, completely baseless. But the fear is very real. You, a person who has seen the scientific explanation for the plague, find yourself in a world that is still, in many ways, living in the Dark Ages. You are a witness to a world that is not just rebuilding itself, but is also trying to find new ways to make sense of a world that has stopped making sense. You are a part of that process, a small, quiet part, but a part nonetheless. The myths and folklore, for all their strangeness, are a testament to the human need to find meaning in chaos, but you, a survivor, have seen the truth. You've seen how a world died and how a new one is being reborn. You realize that your journey is not just about staying alive, it's about watching a world rebuild and repopulate itself. The old towns, once bustling with life, are now being resettled by new people. The old land, once worked by serfs, is now being farmed by new tenants. The world is not just recovering, it's transforming. A mainstream historical fact is that the immense population loss from the plague, while catastrophic in the short term, led to a more dynamic and mobile society in the long run. The survivors, no longer tied to the land, had the freedom to move and find new opportunities. The immense labour shortage meant that wages rose, and the standard of living for the average person improved. The plague, in its brutal efficiency, had created a more equitable world. You see a family, a young couple with a small child, settling into an abandoned homestead. They are not noble or rich, but they are full of hope. They are the new world, a world built on resilience and courage. Historians still argue whether the post-plague world was a golden age for the common person or if the psychological trauma and the memory of the immense death toll overshadowed any economic gains. A quirky tidbit you hear is that some people started to believe that the plague was a kind of divine reset, a cleansing fire that had burned away the old, corrupt world and had paved the way for a new, purer one. This belief, while comforting for some, was also a dangerous one, as it often led to a lack of empathy for those who had died. You, a survivor, know the truth. The plague was not a divine reset. It was a brutal, meaningless act of nature. But you also know that in the face of this brutality, people have found a way to not just survive, but to build a better world. And you, a small, quiet part of that rebuilding, feel a sense of hope you haven't felt in a long, long time. You've seen the long-term effects of the plague, the way it has reshaped society, but you know that the fight isn't over. A second wave, a secondary outbreak, is always a possibility. You've heard whispers of it, of the plague returning in a new, more virulent form. You're in a new land, a safe one, but you are not immune to fear. The town leaders, remembering your stories, are now preparing for this possibility. They have a plan, a set of specific rules that they will follow if the plague returns. A mainstream historical fact is that the Black Death was not a one-time event. It returned in cycles for centuries, and these subsequent outbreaks, while often less lethal, were just as terrifying. The lessons of the first wave were crucial for survival in the second. You advise the town leaders to have a clear system of communication, a way to quickly and accurately share information about the spread of the disease. You tell them that the old fear of pestilential wind is a dangerous one, and that the real danger lies in close human contact. You also advise them to have a designated area for the sick, a place where they can be cared for without infecting the rest of the community. This is a crucial lesson from your journey. Isolation is not a punishment, it is a life-saving measure. Historians still argue whether the repeated outbreaks of the plague helped to reinforce public health measures or if they simply led to a renewed sense of fatalism and despair. A quirky tidbit you learn from the town leaders is that they have a new custom, a kind of ritual that they perform every year on the anniversary of the plague's first outbreak. They all wear a small sprig of rosemary, a herb that they believe will ward off the disease. The custom is completely useless, of course, but it's a way of collectively remembering, of collectively grieving, and of collectively preparing for the future. You are a survivor, but you are also a part of this new culture, a culture that is built on the ashes of the old. You are no longer just running from the plague, you are living with it, and you are helping a new world learn how to do the same. You've advised the town leaders on a new kind of public health, a set of rules and precautions that are a direct result of your experiences. But your knowledge of the plague is not just about human survival, it's also about the intricate web of life that surrounds you. You realize that the role of animals, from the largest to the smallest, is a crucial, often overlooked part of the plague's story. You see a cat stalking a rat in an alley, a simple act of nature that, in your mind, takes on a new, more terrifying meaning. A mainstream historical fact is that the plague was primarily transmitted by fleas that lived on rats. The rats were the carriers, and the fleas were the vectors. Without them, the plague could not have spread in the way that it did. You recall a time in the old world when cats and dogs were seen as pests, often killed or abandoned. A quirky tidbit you remember from a passing minstrel is a song about a village that, in its fear and superstition, killed all of its cats, believing them to be the familiars of witches. The result was a massive increase in the rat population and a swift and deadly outbreak of the plague. The people, in their ignorance, had killed the very thing that was protecting them. Historians still argue whether the widespread killing of cats in medieval Europe was a significant factor in the spread of the plague or if it was simply a cruel coincidence. You see a small dog, a scruffy, flea-ridden thing, a reminder of the animals that, for all their love and loyalty, were also a part of the plague's story. You realize that the plague, in its brutal efficiency, had turned the very world you lived in against you. The rats in the streets, the fleas on their backs, the animals in the fields, they were all a part of a larger, more terrifying ecosystem of death. Your journey has taught you that survival is not just about outrunning a disease, it's about understanding the world you live in all its brutal and beautiful complexity. You are a survivor, but you are also a student of a world that is not just human, but animal as well. The town is preparing for a second outbreak, and you've helped them understand the importance of hygiene and isolation, but you realize that the plague's legacy isn't just one of death and despair, it's also one of scientific advancements that grew from the ashes of the old world. You are a living testament to this, a person who has seen the flaws in the old medical theories and has helped to introduce new, more rational ones. A mainstream historical fact is that the plague's sheer brutality forced a new, more empirical approach to medicine. Doctors and scientists, in their desperate attempts to understand and cure the disease, began to move away from the ancient theories of humours and miasmas and towards a more observational, evidence-based approach. You tell the town leaders about a new kind of medical school that you've heard about, a place where students are taught not just from books, but from direct observation. This is a radical, new idea, and it's a direct result of the plague. Historians still argue whether this new scientific approach was a direct result of the plague or if it was a natural evolution of thought that was simply accelerated by the tragedy. For you, it's a very real and very hopeful sign of progress. You, a simple person, have helped to usher in a new age of science, a world where knowledge is not just a collection of ancient texts, but a living, breathing thing. A quirky tidbit you learn from a local healer is that in some parts of the world, people have started to use a new kind of medicine. A medicine that is not based on herbs or potions, but on a strange, new substance called plague water. A liquid made by boiling aromatic herbs and flowers in a sealed pot, while the remedy itself is useless. The process of sealing the pot is a crucial step in the development of germ theory. The people, in their ignorance, were creating a sterile liquid, a small, quiet act of science in a world of superstition. You can't help but feel a sense of hope. You are a survivor. But you are also a witness to a world that is not just rebuilding itself, but is also finding a new, more scientific way to live. You've helped the town leaders and healers understand the science and practicality of survival. But the plague's legacy isn't just one of science and public health. It's also one of deep philosophical and religious questioning. The immense death toll and the seemingly random nature of the disease have shattered the old certainties. You are a living testament to this. A person who has seen a world that once had a clear and ordered view of God and the universe, now thrown into chaos and doubt. A mainstream historical fact is that the Black Death sparked a profound crisis of faith. People questioned why a benevolent God would allow such a terrible thing to happen. You overhear a conversation between a priest and a scholar. The priest is arguing that the plague is a divine punishment for mankind's sins, and that the only way to appease God is through prayer and repentance. The scholar, however, is arguing that the plague is a natural phenomenon, a brutal act of nature that has nothing to do with God's will. He says that the only way to fight it is not with prayer, but with reason and science. This is a crucial debate, and you, a survivor, have a foot in both worlds. You have seen the flagellants and their desperate faith, but you have also seen the small, remote villages that survived not by faith, but by isolation. Historians still argue whether this crisis of faith led to a more secular society, or if it simply paved the way for new, more personal forms of spirituality. A quirky tidbit you hear is that some people started to believe that the plague was a kind of test, a way for God to separate the true believers from the false ones. They would walk through plague-ridden towns, a grim game of Russian roulette, believing that their faith would protect them. The idea is, of course, completely insane. But the belief is very real. You, a survivor, know the truth. The plague is not a test. It is a reality. But you also know that in the face of this reality, people have found a new kind of spirituality, a new kind of faith, a new way to find meaning in a world that has stopped making sense. You are a part of that new search, a quiet, thoughtful part. You've witnessed a world that has been utterly changed, from its social structures to its philosophical underpinnings. The plague, a seemingly random and meaningless event, has become the defining moment of your life and the lives of countless others. Your journey, a solitary one born of terror, has evolved into something more. You are a survivor, a witness, and a teacher, and now you are a part of the quiet, Long-term healing of a changed society. You are in a town that is not just surviving, but thriving. It is a town built on the lessons of the plague. A town where people value community, public health, and knowledge. A mainstream historical fact is that in the long run, the Black Death led to a number of positive social changes. The labor shortage led to higher wages and a decline of serfdom. The crisis of faith led to new forms of spirituality and a new emphasis on personal piety. And the sheer scale of the death led to a new kind of social contract, a new kind of community. You are a living testament to this, a person who has seen the worst of humanity but has also seen the best. Historians still argue about whether the long-term benefits of the plague outweighed the short-term horrors. For you, a person who has lived through both, the answer is not so simple. A quirky tidbit you learn is that the town has a new tradition, a yearly festival where they celebrate life, not death. They sing new songs, songs not of sorrow but of hope, and they tell new stories, stories not of fear but of resilience. You are asked to tell your story, the story of your journey, and you do. You tell them about the plague doctors, the flagellants, the quiet heroes, and the strange superstitions. You tell them about the pain, the terror, and the hope. Your story is now a part of their story, a part of a new kind of history. You feel a sense of peace you haven't felt since before the plague. You are no longer running, you are home, now. As the long journey ends and the firelight grows dim, a sense of calm washes over you. The world outside may still be broken, but here, in this quiet place, a new world is being born. The stories you've shared, the lessons you've taught, they will live on. The chaos of the past is fading, replaced by a gentle hum of quiet resilience. You can let go now. Let the warmth of the fire envelop you. Feel the slow, steady rhythm of your breath. The fear, the running, the constant vigilance. You can release it all. Close your eyes. The night is quiet, and the world is slowly, gently, healing. Rest now. Your journey is over. The sweet sleep you've earned is waiting. End of script. Sweet dreams.